Hey, Greg here. Did you know that I've created a few walking tours of Bangkok? Using the GPS on your phone, the routes take you through some of my favorite areas of the city, exploring the fascinating neighborhoods and hidden history that give Bangkok its sweet, sweet mojo. Head to voicemap.me and search for Bangkok. On this episode, we talk to fellow podcaster Mike Tatarski about making a show in Vietnam.
So if you want to learn more about the expat podcasting scene in Southeast Asia, you'll learn a lot on this episode of the Bangkok Podcast.
Sawadee krap, and welcome to the Bangkok Podcast. My name is Greg Jorgensen, a Canadian who came to Thailand in 2001 with a dream of owning a little beer bar on a beach, overlooking the fact that I am not a bar guy, only like beaches in small doses, and can rarely drink more than 2 beers in a sitting. Never worked out.
It was a good idea nonetheless.
It was a good idea.
And I'm Ed Knuth, an American who came to Thailand on a 1-year teaching contract 23 years ago, fell in love with naturally underestimating Thai women's ages because they all look so young, so I never left.
You got to be careful with that in the West, right? You got to, well, anywhere really, you got to sort of like play your cards right. But
oh no, for sure. You know, I don't want to generalize, of course, although that's exactly what I'm doing. Yeah. I think interacting, well, in general, well, the interesting thing is in Thai culture, it's actually not rude to ask someone's age. So that's another twist to this whole thing in Thailand.
Right.
In Thailand, around Thai women, you don't have to feel shy about asking their age. Something that I would suggest is a bad idea with almost all Western women. You're just not supposed to ask.
That's right. You know, we've talked about on the show before too. Is the when I don't know if you noticed, but most pregnant women, or a lot of them that I've seen in Thailand, wear a little safety pin on the front of their dress.
Well, you mentioned this to me on a show a couple months ago, and I'd never noticed it before. But you basically turned me on to this aspect of Thai culture.
But you've seen it before, right? You've seen it?
I can't. To be honest, I'm not sure I've seen it, but I don't know. I'll have to keep my eyes open. I don't remember seeing it, but you taught me this. Yeah,
once you see it, you'll definitely be like, oh, that's it. So they wear like a large safety pin on the front of their little maternity dress. But I guess that is, I always sort of thought it was weird, and I never really understood why. But I guess that's a really good sign because you know that they're with child. So that gets you out of the ultimate social faux pas, which is saying, when are you due? And then the woman says, what? I'm not pregnant. It's just like even worse than overestimating her age.
That's the ultimate. No doubt about that.
Anyway, that was a tangent.
Alrighty, we want to give a big thanks to all of our patrons who support the show. Patrons get every episode a day early, behind-the-scenes photos of our interviews, a heads up to send questions to upcoming guests, and access to our Discord server to chat with me, Greg, and other listeners around the world. But best of all, patrons also get an unscripted, uncensored bonus episode every week where we riff on current events and Bangkok topics. On this week's bonus show, we chatted about my night out seeing famous Thai pop star Hugo's American country music band, the hopeful end of the hot season and the beginning of the sweet, sweet rainy season, how Greg cheated on a recent bike ride, and some interesting info on how quickly his son, part of Generation Alpha, has taken to group voice chats with classmates, texting, and generally being a digital native. To learn how to become a patron and get all this good stuff, plus access to our over 700 bonus and regular back episodes, click the support button at the top of our website.
That's right. And also don't forget, if you listen to us on Spotify, you can now hear all of the bonus shows there as well. If you're a patron, simply link your Patreon account to your Spotify account and add our new feed titled Bangkok Podcast and Badass Patrons Only to hear the regular and bonus shows in the same place.
Nice.
Alrighty then. Well, this episode is part 1 of a 2-part series that might turn into a 3 or 4-part series if our luck changes. Now, the idea for this episode came about when Ed and I were discussing if there were other regional podcasts like ours. That is, podcasts hosted by expats that discuss the issues they deal with as they try to assimilate to and understand their new homes and cultures. So we decided to start looking, but long story short, there weren't many in our little group. We found 2 podcasts similar to ours, to be precise, and this week is the first one. So we are going to be talking with my buddy Mike Tatarski, who hosts the Vietnam Weekly podcast. Based in Ho Chi Minh City, Mike's show talks to people doing unique, important work in or about Vietnam in an aim to get a better understanding of that dynamic, increasingly important country. As we often say about podcasts, a rising tide lifts all boats, the more the merrier, etc., etc., and they are a great way to learn about what's going on in the region from people that are on the ground every day. So I called Mike in Ho Chi Minh City to talk about his show, how he puts it together, the issues he faces as he does so, and how it compares to our experiences doing a similar thing in Thailand. All right, I'm here with my buddy in Vietnam, Mr. Mike Tatarski, he of the Vietnam Weekly podcast. Mike, welcome to the Bangkok Podcast.
Thanks for having me, Greg. Good to be here.
Yeah, well, thanks for agreeing to come on. Now, you and I have met once in real life, if I remember correctly. You were in town and we managed to have a bowl of noodles together. And I've been following your podcast in Vietnam for the past couple of years since we met, and it seems to be going really well. And I'm really excited that you're part of this like short little series that we're doing on our show here, because I thought it would be really fun to get to know fellow podcasters around Asia. Because I would like to get to know fellow podcasters around Asia, specifically podcasters like yourself who talk about the country that you're based in. You know, like I think I said in the intro, there's a lot of podcasts that talk about general things and ideas around Southeast Asia, like travel or business or something like that. But those are fairly innocuous and fly above the radar or under the radar. I'm not sure how it goes, but maybe. But I wanted to discuss what it was like being a podcaster in a country where you talk about that country and the intricacies and possible conflicts and dangers that brings. Not like podcasters high on the list of most dangerous jobs or anything like that. No. But tell us a little bit about the Vietnam Weekly podcast. How did it start, and what do you do, and how do you put it together?
Sure. Yeah. So I guess I should start by saying it's been a bit of a drawn out process. So, I mean, this was kind of born out of my newsletter of the same name, which I guess I'll just plug, the Vietnam Weekly on Substack, and then during the pandemic, I launched the podcast, because like everybody else was stuck at home without much to do.
Right.
And did, I think, 5 or 6 episodes. I mean, this would have been back in 2021 or 22, I suppose. And then lockdown ended here and life rapidly went back to normal. And I kind of just dropped it and just stuck with the newsletter, which continued growing in the ensuing couple of years. And then late last year, I actually did a 3-month or like 100-day program offered through CUNY in New York, their graduate school of journalism, an online program about entrepreneurial journalism. And that kind of like reignited the spark of wanting to get back to podcasting. I mean, a few people had kind of said I should anyway, especially I already had a feed and all that stuff. It was just dormant. And then, relaunched it in early February, right around Lunar New Year. Yeah. So there was kind of like a 2-year gap in episodes. But now it's good. I've really been enjoying it over the last couple months. Actually, when I relaunched it, I said I was going to do it every 2 weeks and kind of got so excited, and much to my relief, like people just said yes when I asked if they wanted to come on. So was like, well, I'll just do it weekly, because I ended up having several kind of in the can, ready to go. I'll see how long I can maintain that cadence, but I'm really enjoying it so far.
And it's just you that does it, or do you have some friends and a team? I think I've heard a couple of co-hosts on previous episodes.
No, this is all me.
Okay, maybe I was wrong.
Yeah, so I mean, I was previously at Saigoneer and had the Saigoneer podcast, which I like co-started. So that there was co-hosts on that one, my friends Paul and Coy, but this one is separate from Saigoneer. But with the newsletter, it's just me. I should probably try to get a bit of help someday, because it takes some time. But yeah, it's just me as of now.
It's funny that your story, because it's roughly similar to what I did with the Bangkok podcast, because season 1 started with my co-host Tony, and he moved to Japan, and we sort of said like,
I remember hearing some of those.
We're like, all right, well, that was fun, and let's get on with our lives. And then I randomly met Evo at a party, and he said, your podcast still gets like X number of listeners every month. You should start it up again. I was like, oh, well, all right. Well, I'll need a co-host. And he's like, I'm free. So we started season 2 and we've been doing it every week ever since. So
Nice.
it's funny how these things sort of like you abandon them, but they sort of stick to you and come back in.
I know for sure. I guess that's, I mean, it's good if it comes back around. That means, there must be people out there enjoying it and appreciating it.
I guess so, yeah. Now, my podcast, the Bangkok Podcast, is sort of more of a smart-ass, fun, laid-back discussion-style look at life in Bangkok/Thailand. But the tone of your show is a little bit more serious, a little bit more professional. What kind of angle are you going for, and what kind of guests do you have on?
Yeah, so since it's kind of spun out of my newsletter, which is, newsy, and I mean, I'll add in a touch of sarcasm or snark when it's called for, but generally covers pretty serious topics. Sometimes we're already too serious, but hey, that's news and journalism, I suppose. Mm-hmm. But kind of starting out, I mean, it was looking at topics I cover a lot in the newsletter, like, the Mekong River, Mekong Delta, energy policy, kind of geopolitics, those sorts of things. And then looking, I just drew up a Google Doc of people I know, who I could ask to be on the show, some of whom I know like pretty well, or at least have their direct contact info, other people who, I mean, maybe I've seen on LinkedIn, but would be kind of a cold contact. And I will say that's not to toot my own horn, but that's kind of been a nice thing where I've reached out to some people I've never communicated with and asked them if they want to be on, and they'll be like, oh, I love the newsletter, love the podcast, happy to join. So that's
nice.
Nice to, because you don't always know, obviously, who's, consuming your work.
Right. Some validation there, right?
Yeah. And then I suppose in terms of format, I mean, it's kind of, I don't hope I'm not copying anything, but kind of inspired by the likes of, I guess, maybe Ezra Klein's like New York podcast for the New York Times, or sort of these like interview format, fresh air, what have you. Although Terry Gross can be maybe a bit more lighthearted at times. But kind of these one-on-one interview style shows. And I mean, most of what I listen to comes from the States, for better or worse. And yeah, I mean, it's still early days. Like, I've thought about me eventually trying to play around with format a little bit. I mean, I did have one episode, or I've had a couple episodes with 2 guests. But right. Yeah, for now, it's kind of what topics do I find interesting about Vietnam? Do I know someone who I think would be able to speak intelligently on it? And also trying to have a good mix of, gender balance. I don't want it to just be other, especially white guys like me talking about Vietnam. Obviously, there's not a problem with having some of those people on. I've had a few, but trying to mix it up with Vietnamese, especially Vietnamese women if possible, or, other expatriate nationalities, what have you.
Right. Let's talk about that for a second, because that's interesting. And that's also something that we struggle with here, because we're very cognizant of the fact that it's very easy to come off as just like, another 2 assholes from outside of Thailand spouting off about Thai culture. And I think if you do that too much, and then you just have other white men on the show, it just becomes sort of like a little shooting gallery. And it can be very easy for someone to take that the wrong way. So we also try to get as many Thais as possible on, as many Thai women as possible on. It's great, but it's not always easy. And not a lot of times, but from time to time, we have gotten criticism from someone. Why don't you get a Thai person to talk about this? And my response is always, I would love to. Do you know any? And 99% of the time it's like, well, no. I was like, well, neither do I. And I don't know how to meet them. So let me know when you know one. Because let me ask what your experience is, because for us, a lot of times, like, there's a lot of topics we'd love to talk about. We'd love to talk about infrastructure and the klongs and how the government works and education and the banking system, all this stuff. But what we find often is that it's really hard to A, find someone who's really good in English, B, who is comfortable coming on and talking on the record publicly about what they do in any official capacity, and C, someone who's not afraid of pissing off someone higher than them. In Thai, we say puyai, like their boss or a manager or something like that. So It's really hard to find an official in any capacity to come on and talk in any official capacity. Do you find the same thing in Vietnam?
I haven't quite run into that yet, but that probably will happen eventually. Again, since I'm still kind of in early days, I suppose I've I guess I'm a bit concerned that I'm getting some of my easiest potential guests out of the way early. Just it's like, I know this person will say yes, or this is someone I've talked to a bunch in the past. Like I'm pretty confident they'll say yes. We'll see in 6 months or something like that. But certainly there are topics that, I mean, I know like I won't be touching on simply because it won't really be possible. I mean, you mentioned culture, like Vietnamese culture is something I would like to, learn more about. Like it's not something I really touch on in the newsletter very much. That's definitely one area where I try to tread lightly as a foreigner, even if I have lived here for a while. Like I don't necessarily think people need to know or want to know what I think of Vietnamese movies or music or something along those lines. That is something I would like to try to talk about on the podcast at some point. But like you said, finding the right person. And then on some issues, I mean, I did an episode about the anti-corruption campaign, which is a huge story here. And I think a few people, I told a few people I was doing that and they were like, good luck. But I had a great guest. Yeah. I mean, I've had a few like overseas Vietnamese who, actually, I think they're all based in Australia, funnily enough, but were fantastic guests. And there was one, had another episode where I sent some questions in advance and the guest asked if I could change a couple, just they weren't totally comfortable with my phrasing, which that's completely fair. And, I'll hold back myself on some issues. I don't want to, I'm trying not to be stupid about anything. But it is something that's, I imagine in the future as, I kind of like search for more ideas and topics to talk about, it may be a little complicated.
It can get a bit complicated. I remember years ago, we wanted to do a show when King Rama IX passed away. We wanted to do a show about why he was such a big influence on Thailand and why Thai people cared so much for him and why he meant so much to the Thai people. And we recorded the show and it was very respectful and very, very above the board. There was nothing at all controversial about it. But I sent it around to a few friends just as like, hey, do you want to give this a listen? Like, is there anything here that seems off or weird that we should be worried about? And one friend got back to me with some very, very good advice. And he said, no, it's fine. But you know what? Foreigners don't need to have an opinion on everything. And I was like, yeah, you're right. You're right. So we didn't do that show. We killed it. Okay. And in its place, we did a show about self-censorship, which is what a reality of being a media personality in Thailand is sometimes bumps up against,
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, same here. And I know in the journalism world, at least in some countries that have the luxury, self-censorship is kind of anathema. I mean, it's like a cardinal sin, but if you live in and you want to continue living in places like Thailand, I suppose, or Vietnam, it's something you have to practice from time to time.
It's a necessary evil.
Yeah. And that's a smart point as well. Like I think we can all, I'm sure you and I have plenty of internal opinions that maybe we just share with our close friends or just keep entirely to ourselves that don't necessarily need to be on mic or written out.
Yeah, totally. And sometimes I do get, we get some emails from time to time. Why you should talk about this and you should talk about this. And why didn't you do this? And some critical emails. And a lot of the times it's warranted, but a lot of the times it's not. And my stock response is, you know what? Podcasting is free, man. Go ahead, start your podcast. Let me know when the first episode is up and I will subscribe. But I'll do my show and you do your show.
Yeah, that's something I feel. And I will say, I mean, there are a few other English language podcasts, or maybe more than a few here in Vietnam. I definitely don't want to pretend like I'm the only one. Although I am one of the few kind of focusing on more of a news lens or news angle, what have you. But I feel similarly with my newsletter is I don't want to sound overly like in my head, but I'm aware that I'm a foreigner here, and I wish there would be more like Vietnamese. There's a lot of really, really smart Vietnamese people, and other non-Vietnamese here in Vietnam who I think like I would love to hear more voices in the newsletter and podcast space as well. Like you said, it's free or largely free to set up. You can do it pretty low tech. So it is something. I mean, we were talking before you started recording about having a hard time finding other podcasters in the region. And it would be cool if there were more, or in English at the very least.
Yeah, I always say a rising tide lifts all boats. So the more, the better. I think it'd be great. But it seems like a lot of podcasts come and go, and people have the idea, I want to do a show, and then they do 2 or 3 and go, man, this is a lot of work, and then they stop.
Yeah, I mean, it is, no doubt.
What's the podcast community there like? In Thailand, like the Thai language podcast community is quite big, but it's fairly opaque to me because I don't speak so well and I don't listen to Thai podcasts. So I don't have any exposure to that. But from what I understand, it's quite big and quite active. What's it like there with the Vietnamese podcasts and then the foreign community who might, or the Thai community as well, who listens to your podcast?
Yeah, I mean, it's similar for me with the Vietnamese language podcast side, because my Vietnamese is, well, let's just say it's not good enough to listen to a podcast, unfortunately. So I know there is some sort of industry there. I mean, I believe it's relatively small, but there's something. I mean, there's a media company called Vietcetera that has, I think, one kind of flagship English show and then a handful of Vietnamese shows.
Vietcetera, that's a great name.
Yeah, I mean, they're kind of more on the culture, I think, a bit kind of like Gen Z focused.
Okay.
And then there's a couple other, I know of English language ones, like 7 Million Bikes is by a guy named Neil here in Ho Chi Minh City. And then my friend Ian Payton in Hanoi has one called You Don't Know Vietnam, which I like a lot. He started, I think, last year. But kind of, I mean, as the title suggests, kind of tries to maybe disabuse is a strong word, but kind of takes on like maybe misunderstandings or misconceptions about Vietnam, often with Vietnamese guests, which is really, his is quite interesting. But
Cool.
There's not like a community per se. There's probably some others that I'm leaving out, not by any malice or anything like that, but it's small for sure.
Right. What about your listeners? Like, do you have any meetups, or does the Vietnam Weekly thing, like, does it do any outreach or community?
I've definitely thought about it. I mean, that course I mentioned that I did late last year. I mean, it was a bit US. It was like based out of New York, so understandably a bit US centric, and kind of like having meetups or events was something they really talked about a lot for, creators, for lack of a better word. I haven't I haven't done that. I mean, part of that is a bit my own introversion, like, or fear of like, what if I host something and like one person comes? I mean, I know I have a lot more readers or listeners than that, but there is that fear. So I think it's something I'll probably do eventually. I don't know if I would ever do like a live podcast show or something like that, but certainly some kind of meetup would be nice. There is a slightly larger like newsletter writer community that has kicked around the idea of meeting up. Hasn't quite happened yet, but
Okay.
Maybe I should like also try a bit harder to make that happen.
You lead it. Become the the guy in charge.
Yeah.
That sounds like a lot of work. So the one thing I really wanted to talk about, and I'm going to be talking to everyone who's on this little series we're doing here about this, is that we touched on it really briefly earlier about things you can't talk about in Thailand or in Vietnam. Now, obviously in Thailand, there's the royal family, and there's certain things as well that are just best left untouched, unsaid, undiscussed. Of course, if you discuss those things and get noticed by the right/wrong person, then you could be in serious trouble. And, I'm not here to win any Pulitzer Prizes. I'm just a dude with a microphone. I've got too much to lose. So I imagine it's the same in Vietnam. And I wanted to talk to you about how you navigate that, because just recently in the news, there was the case of the big corruption scandal, and the woman who got nailed for that. I mean, she got the death sentence. So Vietnam doesn't mess around, man. So how do you navigate that? And what happens if you go too far into an area you're not supposed to?
Well, that second question I hope to never learn the answer to, because I'm not actually.
You want the answer to stay? I have no idea.
Yeah. I mean, the reality is foreigners certainly have a buffer, which is, I mean, obviously unfair for Vietnamese nationals, but that's the reality. I assume it's maybe a little bit similar in Thailand, at least. That being said, I mean, as I mentioned earlier, like I'm not going to do anything stupid. I mean, I've lived here a while. I have some sense of, I mean, I think there are some pretty clear red lines. There's other maybe gray lines or things you just have to kind of guess. But certainly like I'm not going to criticize individual high level leaders or anything like that. I mean, with that kind of stuff, I'm always I'm not from here. This isn't my country. It's not my place to do that anyway. Even if I were, like, that just wouldn't make any sense.
Do you feel like, though, after being there for so long, for X number of years, how long have you been in Vietnam?
About 12 years now.
Okay. Do you think that after 12 years, maybe you should be, and then just playing devil's advocate, you should be afforded the opportunity to be a bit critical and a bit sort of to be able to offer constructive criticism? I feel like I should in Thailand. Like, I've been here 23 years. I feel like I've earned the right to offer constructive criticism. Do you feel like maybe that foreigners should be allowed to do that?
Yeah, I suppose so. And I mean, I hope something I haven't had an episode about on the podcast, but I do cover a lot in the newsletters, infrastructure. And I think maybe that's one area where I think if I were to talk about it and if I write about it, I hope sometimes it comes off as constructive, or comes off as like, look, I'm a Ho Chi Minh City resident. I know all the Vietnamese people living here want, the metro line to be finished. It's been, we've been waiting for so long. So that kind of stuff, I guess I hope it comes off as just like, a concerned resident, basically.
Right.
And I mean, on the political side, I think, that's a bit more complicated, especially, I suppose, in a form of government like we have here. But I think all that being said, I do think there is a bit more space for people to be critical here than kind of generally believed. I mean, it won't necessarily lead to anything. But
interesting.
I do see a lot of comments on, I mean, Facebook's a cesspool, but I'll see people post stuff on Facebook and I'm like, wow, you really? And I'm talking about foreigners here, and like they continue living here.
Right. In Thailand, I think, and I think it's probably the same over there, generally we stay away from, being overly critical of big companies, being overly critical of individual people if they're well connected or wealthy. Royal family is obviously well out of bounds. Anything sort of touching on the Thai national identity or history that gets a bit too close for comfort is probably best left alone. I think probably that would cover most of what we have to dance around. Is there anything else specific in Vietnam that that someone who living there would probably be wise to avoid commenting on?
Certainly land issues. That's kind of historically a big issue. I mean, just last summer, there was an attack in the Central Highlands that killed like 9 people, which was, for here, was like kind of a shocking spasm of violence. And that was one where, yeah, I did have a section about it in the newsletter, but I even I was like, caveat, I am strictly saying what's in domestic media. I am not like editorializing anything on this. Well, it was kind of a confluence of land and also ethnic minority tensions, which those two combined, like, just don't even go anywhere near that.
Interesting.
Yeah, so definitely that. And I mean, for me personally, because I use state media as like a handy guide for like, basically if they're talking about something, I'll be like, oh, well then like that's kind of gotten the green light to be discussed. Right. Maybe I'll go a little bit further than them. But like with this corruption campaign, for example, once an official or something is like arrested or removed from office, then it's like, well, okay, now we can, I mean, I don't have anything personal to add about the chairman of some province or something like that, but if they're in trouble, it's pretty clear that you don't really need to worry about it at that point.
Right.
Again, not that I'm going to like criticize them personally, but you can be like, here's what they did and here's why they got in trouble.
It's a good rule of thumb.
So yeah, I mean, and I'll add a bit more context maybe, or analysis, which can definitely be lacking in some of the coverage here.
Yeah, and I think I mentioned it. We were chatting earlier over email, and I said one of the peculiarities of Thai law is that even if something is true, it doesn't mean you can't be nailed, taken to court for saying it publicly. So that's like libel and defamation. So, there's all these like uniquely local twists to the law and things that maybe as Westerners we're not used to. So it pays to stay on top of those things and those little nuances.
Yeah. And I mean, with my, like, I haven't had, or even a prospective guest where it's been like, our topic is going to be one, or maybe there's people I want to have on who will talk about like their company. But I haven't, like, there's nobody I've had in mind where it's like, we're going to spend an entire episode criticizing conglomerate X.
Right.
I just don't think that wouldn't really make much sense.
How do you say cease and desist in Vietnamese? Yeah.
Right.
Let's as we're finishing up here, let's get down to brass tacks as a podcast nerd. How do you come up with your ideas? You said you just think about stuff that you'd like to talk about. How do you find your guests?
So I mean, I think I kind of referenced, but when I was launching or getting ready for my first episodes, like just went through my kind of like mental Rolodex of like immediate people who came immediately to mind. Started writing them out on a Google sheet, or doc, whatever, no free ads for Google here. And then, reached out to a few people that, again, kind of ones that I was like, they'll definitely say yes, or I'm 99% sure they'll say yes. And then others I've been kind of relying more on LinkedIn since Twitter kind of fell apart. And that's been good for finding some people as well, or at least seeing what people are talking about related to Vietnam.
Interesting.
And then, I mean, guiding the news a little, or being guided by the news a little bit. I've actually gotten really lucky. I've had 2 episodes, one on the anti-corruption campaign, and then one on like financing the energy transition that came out like within a day or two of major news breaking and within those topics. So I was like, well, I did not plan that, but cool. And then, I mean, it's also been nice. I'm only a couple months in, but I've had a few people reach out to me and be like, hey, here's what I do. Do you want to, like, could I be a guest?
Oh, cool.
And they've been doing, like, they're doing interesting stuff as well. So, that's been that, like, I hope to see more of that. Cause obviously I can't be aware of, it's a 1-man team. I'm not aware of everyone doing everything interesting about Vietnam.
Right. That's interesting. I wish we'd get more people reaching out to us. The last time I remember someone reached out and asked to be on the show, he wanted to talk about what it was like dating Thai women. Oh, and we're like, that's not going to happen.
Yeah. And then, I mean, there's really no, otherwise the order of topics is kind of just like whatever I can get scheduled or whoever I can get scheduled and edited first. Right. I mean, if you look at the feed, it's pretty eclectic. I mean, there are a few topics I'll be returning to, like the Mekong Delta or energy, for example. There's so much to talk about within those topics and different angles you can come at it from. And I know people kind of working in different fields within those overarching subjects. So that's something I know in the future I'll have more episodes on that. But otherwise it's, I mean, kind of in any given week, I'll have a few emails out to people, probably a couple interviews scheduled. Right. But from week to week, there's not really any, connection between episodes. And I mean, that's kind of what I was intending. I mean, if you look at the shows in the US I mentioned as sort of inspiration, from week to week, they're not really building off of each other topic wise.
Right. It's totally random. And same with us. We're just making it up as we go. And doing a weekly show is not easy. Like I say, there are many times where Ed and I are sitting in front of the microphones ready to record going, what are we going to talk about? We're both looking at the newspapers. What do we talk about this? No, that sucks. What about this? Well, maybe, but we already did. Didn't we do that before? Oh yeah, we did. So the more shows you do, the harder it is to find those cracks to fill that you've never done before. So
yeah, I definitely, when I was at second year and we were doing that show, that was weekly I think we did around 100 episodes, and there were definitely weeks where, and that was not, some episodes had guests, most didn't, but there were definitely weeks where we were like, oh boy, what the hell are we gonna like? Well, last week did, if what would your Vietnamese superhero be? What are we going to talk about this? I mean, some of those segments like were a lot of fun and I think came out really well, but
Well, can I steal that idea for Thailand? That's a pretty fun one.
So I guess actually one nice thing, again, ask me again in 6 months maybe, but so far with it being interview focused is like, as long as there's a guest, like we have a topic and
Right.
I don't have to like wonder what it's going to be about. But again, we'll see how long I can do this,
that's cool.
Once a week for.
Yeah. Well, you never know. I mean, we started it on a whim and it's been 13 years now. So
That's impressive.
With a break in there. Yeah. Cool, man. Well, last question before we go then. And I'm curious what other people think about this. Why do you do your podcast? What do you get out of it?
So certainly it's edifying for me. I learn from my guests. That's part of, I think obviously kind of the core of being a reporter is curiosity and wanting to learn. Obviously you need to have, or you should have some sort of base knowledge on certain topics, but I think most of the episodes I've done so far, it's topics that I do have a little bit of fluency in at least, but I certainly I hope to get to some where I'm coming in. I mean, I don't want to come in blind because I want to have smart questions for the guest, but, something where I can learn a lot. And I mean, it's similar to why I started the newsletter. I think the feedback I've gotten to both since starting them is that like, there's a real gap, unfortunately, in English language content. I don't like that word, but whatever, for lack of a better word, about Vietnam, contemporary Vietnam. I mean, there's a ton out there still about the war, and I don't want to dismiss the war. It's very important as history. But this is a much more dynamic, interesting country than just kind of that pigeonhole. And now there's kind of the narrative has changed a bit about Vietnam, but now it's modernized in a way internationally, but now it's often seen as like this kind of pawn between China and the US, which has this, interesting narrative of its own, but it's far more complex than that. Yeah. So I think just trying to share the modern Vietnam sort of warts and all, but it's, the complexities and the different wide range of topics. I mean, it deserves to be covered as in depth as places like the US. Right. I'm not saying I'm doing that by myself, but if I can do some tiny part in that, I hope I'll have done what I set out to achieve.
That's great. And that's funny because when we were first starting to do the podcast, I remember I was talking to a guy that I randomly, an old acquaintance who I haven't spoken to in years since, but I told him that we were going to start a podcast and he said, "Are you going to do it about all the red light districts and all the titty bars?" And I said, "No, actually, we're not going to do anything about that." And he said, "Well, good luck." And I was like, that's exactly why we're going to do it, because there's so much more to talk about than just those stupid cliches. And that's what we want to get to the root of.
Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, it's good to hear that as well.
Yeah. Well, Mike, thanks, man. That was really interesting, and you're doing a really good job. Where can people find out more, and what do they get, and what can they learn?
Yeah, sure. I mean, so the podcast is on, I think basically there's so many podcast platforms, but I know it's on all the major ones, Spotify, Apple. I put up just the audio on YouTube. It's Vietnam Weekly on YouTube. It should be on Google if you have Android. It should be on most of the other niche players, I assume. So Vietnam Weekly podcast, and then my newsletter as well is the same name. The link is vietnamweekly.substack.com. There's a free and a paid version. And podcast comes out every week. Newsletter is weekly, as the name suggests. And
That's great. All right on, man. Well, thanks a lot for coming on. Pleasure to talk to you again. And next time I'm in Ho Chi Minh, or next time you're in Bangkok, let's grab some more noodles. I gotta say, man, when my family was in Ho Chi Minh, about 8 months ago, and really loved it. What a great city. And I think Thai food gets all the love, but Vietnamese food is pretty damn good.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I mean, I also enjoy Thai, but Vietnamese is just so diverse and so much more kind of beyond the typical pho banh mi that everyone knows, which those are great, but there's way, way more to it than that. And great to come on the show. Thanks for having me. I enjoyed this.
No, my pleasure, man. And like I said, a rising tide lifts all boats, and I hope that more podcasters in Asia can get the word out about the nuances and depths and cultural fascinations of the particular countries or communities they're in. So I think we're part of that, And like you said, we're doing a small part, but it's still a part. So yay us.
Yeah, and there's definitely an audience for it as well. So yeah, join the club.
Right on. All right, thanks, man. I hope to see you soon. And yeah, let me know if you're in town. We'll get a noodle, a beer, and some noodles.
Sounds good.
Man, that was really interesting. I feel like he is kind of a kindred soul. Mike is a kindred soul of ours.
Yeah, it's very interesting, and he does really good stuff. You know, his angle is a bit more studious and serious than us. Like he's a journalist, right. And his podcast is in pursuit of being a journalist, whereas ours is a bit more loosey goosey, smart ass, and fun. But in a very, very good listen, and it's like I said, a really good way to learn about the countries that are right next door.
Well, in some ways, his experience is like ours in that, you know, he's got to worry about what he says. I mean, for different reasons than we do. But he's still constrained. I think maybe anytime you're in a public space, you know, I mean, I hardly ever post on social media, but before I do, I'm always thinking before I post anything.
Yeah, exactly. And I think I mentioned in the show too, like, you know, we think Thailand is strict too, but Vietnam doesn't mess around, man. Like I mentioned in the interview, you know, that woman that just did that insane corruption where she skimmed like $1 billion or something from the company, and they sentenced her to death, you know, like.
Oh, wow. I think I missed that story.
Yeah, within within a couple of months of the story breaking, like they'd already taken her down. So, yeah, really interesting to hear what's going on. And Mike does really good work. He also does a Substack newsletter. So, like I said, he's a real journalist.
Cool. Very cool.
Yeah. So thanks for chatting, Mike. It's interesting. And everyone check it out, the Vietnam Weekly podcast. Subscribe to the newsletter. And let's all put our heads together and start talking about this region that we live in and the dynamism that we enjoy being among. Is that good?
For sure. Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, Mike. Okay, let's check in with our new segment called Idiom Proof, where we try to learn a bit more about Thai culture by investigating one of the many funny and creative Thai idioms that we've come across. To help us with the correct pronunciation, we've asked our friend Bank to read it for us first, and then we will discuss. Take it away, Bank.
มะนาวไม่มีน้ำ มะนาวไม่มีน้ำ
Oh, wow. I've never heard this, but I like it. Manao mai mi nam.
Yeah, Manao mai mi nam, which means a lime without water. And what that means is that you speak very terse and coarsely and not in the syrupy sweet way that most Thais like.
So lime without water. So it means like a dried up lime.
I get like lime juice without water, like just tart and like right to the point. There's nothing nice about it.
Oh, like kind of harsh, like interesting.
Sour. Because you know, with a lot of Thai language, you've got to use like special words, polite words. You got to depending on the status of the person.
Oh, for sure. No, you got to be syrupy sweet. That's the perfect way to put it. And I guess a dried up lime is not syrupy sweet.
That's right. So Manao mai mi nam, I think is yeah, it's pretty good. So just
I'm gonna have to bust it. Anytime I think someone's being too harsh on me, I'm gonna bust this one out and see what kind of reaction I get.
Just under your breath, be like, oh man, Manao mai mi nam. And that's how I got my black eye. I'm gonna port some of these across to English too. Like next time I'm talking to someone who's, you know, talking too bluntly, I'll just whisper to my friend on the side. I'm like, man, this guy's like a dried up lime. see if they get it. But
hey, it might catch on. You never know.
You never know. But I like that one. Manao mai mi nam. That's pretty good. Thanks, Bank. That's a new one. I'll put in the old lexicon and I'll whip it out at parties.
For sure. Alrighty, a final thanks to our patrons who support the show. Patrons get a ton of cool perks and the warm, fuzzy feeling knowing that they're helping in our never-ending quest for cool content. Find out more by clicking support on our website. And connect with us online. We're Bangkok Podcast on social media, bangkokpodcast.com on the web, or simply bangkokpodcast@gmail.com. We love hearing from our listeners and always reply to our messages.
Yeah, baby. You can also listen to each episode on YouTube. You can send us a voicemail through our website that we'll feature on the show. Hit me up on threads at BKKGreg. Thanks for listening, everyone. Enjoy the rain, and we'll see you back here next week.
For sure. Test.
You see this? You see what that is?
It's a pie
No.
cutter
Yeah.
thing. No, it's a tree.
Kind of like a pie cutter. It's a knife. It's a kunai, a Japanese throwing knife made out of
okay.
paper that my son and his friend decided. He came home one day and he said, started a business making kunai origami at school. We sell them to my classmates for 20 baht. And
So 20 baht. That's great.
It's a pretty solid piece of origami. So I said, great. I said, give me 5. I'm going to be your first customer. I want 5. And he completely failed to deliver them to me. And he's like, teacher said we're not allowed to have a business at school and take money from students. But we're going to make them at home. And I was like, all right, well, you got to please your customer. And he just sort of forgot about it. So I'm joking with him now. I'm like, I'm a very unhappy customer. You're not doing very good customer service here.
So funny. So that's a lesson. It happens to be a negative lesson, but he's still learning something.
I thought it was funny that his teacher said, they literally shut him down. Like, you can't do that. You can't make things and sell them, create this sort of shadow economy at school. It reminds me of years ago, my friend Carla, who's also from Canada, she went back to Canada, and her sons, who were probably 11 and 12 at the time, brought back a box of Hubba Bubba bubblegum.
Yeah, okay.
Which you can't buy in Thailand. And they were selling it out of their lockers for 25 cents a piece or 20 baht a piece or whatever it was.
Oh, that's funny.
And they also got shut down by the school. So it's a trend.
Shut down by the man.
That's right. Just another plan by the man to keep the brother down.
That's right.
Right.